Hi, I'm Beckham Dossett, Director of the School of Art. Thank you for being here today live in person in Dudley Recital Hall on the University of Houston campus in the School of Art, and hello to the Instagram audience out there. Hi. We're happy to have you here. Today we have our second speaker of the year in our visiting speaker series, and she is Gina Beavers, artist Gina Beavers, and she is here from New Jersey today. We were just talking about the weather and how warm it is for her, and I told her this is our fall, so we're all very happy. She's timed it perfectly, and we have no hurricane, which is even better. So after last week, 2 weeks ago, we had our first speaker, who is Dr. Rachel Weiss, writer. She was amazing. Today we have Gina. She will be amazing. And then November 29th, we will have one more speaker, Mary Magic. That will be amazing too. Next spring, we have 3 more people coming. Gosh, I think maybe they're all in February. Go to our website and check out the Visiting Speaker Series page. You can see those folks coming up. This talk will be posted on the School of Art YouTube site eventually, and you can go there now and see Dr. Rachel Weiss's talk from 2 weeks ago and all of the talks that we've started recording since 2020 when we went online, and it's a great group of videos and speakers. So with that, I now want to introduce Professor Dana Frankfurt, who will introduce Gina Beavers. Thank you.
Hi. It's my honor to introduce you to Gina Beavers and welcome her to the University of Houston. Gina was born in Athens, Greece, but she comes to us today from her current home and studio in Orange, New Jersey. Orange is a very short distance from New York City, the capital of the art world, where in just over a decade, Gina has established herself as an artist with a unique formal vocabulary and a keen view of both our consumer existence and our technologically mediated obsessions. Gina holds a BA in Studio Art and Anthropology from the University of Virginia, an MFA in Painting and Drawing from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and an MS in Education from Brooklyn College. Since completing her education, Gina's had one career-defining exhibition after the other. She's had 16 solo exhibitions in important galleries, including Marion Boesky Gallery in New York, GNYP Gallery in Berlin, Carl Kostial Gallery in London, Michael Benevento Gallery in Los Angeles, and most importantly, her first solo museum exhibition at MoMA PS1 in Long Island, New York, titled Gina Beavers, The Life I Deserve. Throughout this time, she has also been included in over 90 group exhibitions nationally and internationally at venues including Lehman College Art Gallery in the Bronx, Frans Hals Museum in the Netherlands, Gio Marconi Gallery in Milan, Italy, the ICA and Maine College in Portland, Maine, Gavin Brown Enterprise in New York, Night Gallery in LA, and many, many others. Gina's also been the subject of interviews and exhibition reviews and publications, including New York Times, Frieze, The New Yorker, Interview Magazine, Artforum, Art in America, the Brooklyn Rail, and the list goes on. Her work is included in permanent collections, including the Whitney Museum of Art, the ICA Miami, the Tel Aviv Museum of Art in Israel, as well as many private collections throughout the world. We're so fortunate to have Gina here today. And in a print interview not long ago, she was asked what she would like her legacy to be. Her answer was, "I want people to think she was just unapologetically herself. She followed whatever paths in her work she could, and she was democratic and open and brave with her ideas." That will be a powerful legacy, and her work clearly shows that she is well on her way to achieving this. Please give a warm welcome to Gina Beavers.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah, sweet. Okay. Thank you for having me. I had 6 great studio visits earlier today with the graduate students, and I visited other schools. I taught in the graduate program at Columbia for a year, and I just was like completely blown away, impressed by the work that the graduate students are making and the way they talk about their work, and just the wonderful human beings they are. So it's been lovely to be here. Thank you. I'm going to run through. So for a long time, I sort of did a talk where I went chronologically, and I realized by the end of the talk, I was like, my most recent work, I was barely getting to it. So I decided to like reconfigure this into themes to try to hone in on some things that are really important in my practice. So this section is about process, and interestingly enough, I use this photo of a soft pastel, which is a more recent thing that I'm working with. My paintings can be kind of labor intensive, so the soft pastel is a process that is a lot faster. I had a hard time. And I was dropping out. My mom was like, we'll take an art class, because my mom was an art teacher and always had a studio in the home. So, and that had always been sort of her thing. I was like, no, I'm in theater. I'm the math science person. I'm not doing art. But so I ended up taking like one class and just falling for it. I graduated. I worked underneath this theater downtown in Charlottesville, and I worked at the sandwich shop. This is like old photo from the 90s. You can tell it's not digital. It's like been converted. But there were all these bread boxes for the sandwich shop I worked at, and I would take all the cardboard and start drawing on it. And I was living in Virginia also, just to show you how pre-internet this was. I was working from newspapers. Like, those are the only images I had, but I would take Village Voices and like local circulars, and I would just copy out of them. So that's a factor of my work that has stayed pretty consistent over time, although now I'm just more using the internet. Is that me? Sorry. So this is another bread box. I was also an anthropology major, and I also lived in Europe a lot, or overseas, also in Malaysia, and then would come back to the United States as a kid. So I had this fascination with American culture and Americana. This was just an article about wrestling in like Central Virginia in the newspaper, and I used like charcoal and paint and oil stick and just kind of beating up this cardboard. So this is very early work. So back then, I'm pulling from newspapers, and now I take from the internet. Yes, different sources. On the left is like a folder on my phone with all of the images. I'm sure a lot of you do this too, where you screenshot things and keep them in a folder. The second one is like my search page on Instagram. Third one is like Google searches, which obviously, like, this is pretty interesting actually. If you Google palette, the first two are palettes, but now the second two are now getting into makeup palettes, right? So even the word palette has shifted. Twitter I'm on, so some of the words and some of the narrative ideas and some of the emotional states in my paintings come from Twitter, which is kind of a fraught space. People just like log on and say whatever their most intimate thought is, like nuts. And then at the end of news articles, this is an AP News, there'll be these really odd photos that are trying to grab you or frighten you. Sometimes I've made paintings from those. I would say over the 10 years that I've been making my work, the biggest shift has been Google. Google used to be kind of more of a free-for-all. Like, you could go on there and find really random stuff. Now it's like very commercial, right? It's like all the top hits are going to be products and things that you can buy. If you want to have a really weird experience, go to Amazon without the intent of buying anything and just search around. You can find all sorts of weird products, weird photos of people. It's kind of what Google used to be. But it's, using the internet, it's like hard to overstate the importance of the internet and the effect on painting. This is a Dana Schutz painting from, I think, 2003. And I remember seeing it at the time and thinking how, yes, and also revolutionary this was. We were all starting to search things, and we went from sort of a time period where you were very passive. The images that would come to you you didn't have a lot of control over, like if you couldn't get people to model for you in your studio, you were kind of screwed. But then with the internet, it's like, oh, let me go look up, you know, a photo of a plant. You know, I think that it's completely revolutionized painting, and I think has a lot to do with all of the realism that you're seeing now in the last 10 years, is the internet really being felt. So this is kind of my process. I might find a photo like this, just the butt and the bikini or thong, find that in like Google, and then put it into Photoshop and make my own Photoshop version. So I inserted the cake. So this is kind of like a collage of different things that I found. Then I will draw it out on canvas or linen stretched on panel. And then I add, this is not the most descriptive photo, but I add heavy acrylic to them, and they lie flat. They have to lie flat for a long time. If they're under 4 feet, I just use acrylic. If they're over, I use foam underneath the acrylic so that they don't weigh like 1,000 pounds. But this is kind of like a drying rack where a bunch of them would dry. And then I go in and out with the acrylic, adding acrylic, painting, adding pigment. Sometimes I even subtract. If the acrylic's soft enough, I can use an X-Acto and like get rid of it. But I'm always going back and forth with the photo. Sorry, I don't know what's, oh, there. And then I also have, you know, work straight from an iPad on a stand or on the wall, just like zooming in. That's another reason I think so much hyperrealism is like we have iPads, we have these photos like right at our fingertips. This is the foam that I'll use, just like spray foam for the really large ones, and carve it, and then coat it with acrylic, sort of like frosting a cake. This was for an installation I did, 2018 Photoshop mistake, where I had this little cube of paintings in Photoshop. I like copied and pasted it. It showed up huge, like underneath my original image. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, where you're copying and pasting and it shows up like massive and you're trying to find the corners. And I was like, oh, but that's kind of cool. I want to try to make that. So this is like Photoshop mistake. So these are some artists that I've been influenced by. This is Elizabeth Murray from her show at Pace, 2018. Oh, this is from the 80s actually. But these are these massive structures. They're actually stretcher bars with canvas stretched over them. And interestingly enough, made by Robert Gober, who's like a really amazing artist in his own right. Lynn Folks, who is a California artist, with a lot of like material, like he's using a real plaid shirt, real items mixed in with the paint, found wood. This is Paul Tech from 1964. And it's like a birthday cake, it's like meat within this like minimalist structure. So I love that idea of the structure, but then the visceralness, you know, this like play between the two. So one question that I think about with process is, and maybe question to pose for your practices is, where is the fun and freedom in your practice, and then where is the discipline? Because I think you need both. And you know, sometimes people have the fun and freedom at the end. You know, for me, I think, you know, I'm extremely fun and free with my ideas. Like if I get an idea, I'll make it, no pressure. I'll just make everything I possibly can. But then when it comes to actually making it, I'm extremely disciplined and kind of driven to recreate the photo. Like I'm like very rigid in a certain way. So where is the flexibility and where is the structure? You kind of, I think, need both. An example of someone who worked completely opposite from me would be de Kooning. So de Kooning would kind of stand in front of a blank canvas and then just like react in the moment. So all of the freedom was coming just like in the moment. So I would say I'm like the opposite of that. He also had like massive drinking problem, just saying, because that's an extremely, I think, anxiety producing way to work, right? But I mean, very interesting. Just very different from me. So I started to notice things. This is 2011. This is a background from Wrath of the Titans, one of the costumes. And I would sometimes get ideas from movies. But I saw this armor and I was like, oh, I want to recreate it. I didn't get a photo of it, but it was just from my memory. I was like, you know what? I'm going to go Google abs because I need to know what abs look like to make this painting. So I Googled abs, and this was just like, you can tell really low res picture on Google 10, 11 years ago of just abs. And I was like, okay, well, I'll just make that painting. I went looking for something else, but I'll make that as well. So I made that. On the same page as that search was a random picture of a palette. I was like, oh, that's cool. I'll make that too. This is before or just as Instagram is getting started. So it's still before social media. Yeah, and then from there, I started to Google more JPEGs of palettes, and I was like, oh, I'm making all of these. I think these are all great. And then I got kind of like frustrated. I was like, am I just gonna, make things three-dimensional and paint and just, that's all it will be? Which I end up shifting later on. But in addition to the six-pack abs, I found other sort of bodybuilder type images. So some of this linking, like from one idea to another idea to another idea, is directly from the internet. It's directly like a rabbit hole that you would go down, right? You link, oh, I'm here, now I'm on this page, oh, I found out. So some of my ideas and the way the bodies of work will develop is directly from that. So I was doing an art fair in 2016, and I had this idea that there would be thousands of paintings, and I really just didn't want my paintings to hang just like everybody else's. So I came up with these cube ideas, and the paintings go into the cube, but they can also be taken out. So they're either one piece or they're 5 pieces. And then sometimes even planning a show becomes this kind of spiraling, almost like prequels or kind of like spin-offs of earlier work. So in this show in 2017, I had palettes, large, that were sort of versions of these smaller ones I had done like 5 years earlier. So it's like, you know what? That was an idea that I never fully experimented with. I'm going to go back. But the relationship between them, I really think of in terms of movies. So in this show brought together sporting equipment, or like, balls, makeup. And the name of it was Tennis Ball Yellow, and it was about a conversation I had with my assistant at the time about how to mix the color yellow, tennis ball yellow. This was in London with a green floor, and I was thinking about Wimbledon. And old tennis courts in London used to be like completely paneled. And then this painting was sort of made as a troll. Trolling as painting is a good tactic, I think. Somebody was like, oh, your work is so feminine. And I was like, okay, well, that's pretty dumb, like a dumb thing to say. Here's something really masculine, but not the way I think about it. I had gone to get balloons for my friend, and they had like 40 balloons for girls. They were all pink and princessy. And then they had 2 for boys, and they were like this, like basketball, tennis ball, soccer ball, like super limiting, So it's like this idea of like gender being kind of limiting, okay? So there's like feminine lips perhaps, but like masculine, it was kind of like making a painting as like a comeback or something. And this is the other room in that show. I had like yoga balls. I was really experimenting with this idea of like paper mache under the acrylic and how 3D I could make these forms. This is another example of me spinning out in these wormholes. This is a show I did in Los Angeles called Van Goddess and the Master Bakers. So it had a Van Gogh element, which I spinned as Van Goddess, and then it had this, Master Bakers are kind of like people who make sexy cakes. So these are all like how to make sexy cake tutorials that I had found. This is also kind of before, 2018, yeah. I don't know. There used to be a time when tutorials were just like photo collages, not necessarily video as much. So that's Van Gogh's palette recreated, and then these are how to make a sexy like bachelor party cake, I guess. And then, so this is my current show actually that's opening next month in Sweden. And I just wanted to show you like, so all of that process and figuring out what the ideas will be, how I will make them. In the end, it sort of comes down to where am I going to show it? So then you have a space like this with these like awkward walls and you're like, oh, how am I going to make this interesting? And so I made a plan for the show that involves making these like murals on the one wall. You know, and in the end, that's kind of the process. The process is like through all the conversations with gallerists and curators and, you know, professors who come into your studio and your own ideas and then reality, you have to kind of thread all of these needles, and what you come out with at the end is your work, you know? So it's a combination of your highest ideals with reality, right? Kind of putting a stop or guiding you a little bit. Okay, so next section on the political. So I wanted to talk about my influences, like my earliest influences as an artist. And I would start with the painter William H. Johnson. So I lived in Northern Virginia outside DC, and the Museum of American Art in Washington, DC has an incredible collection of William H. Johnson's work. He was an artist who was highly trained, and yet chose to paint in a style that was more like outsider artist, maybe. He was playing with, like you can see in this previous painting from 1940, influences from Van Gogh, and also, you know, influences from abstraction, outsider art. So he chose to paint in this naive style and to represent his community. And he was an American artist who really couldn't have a career in the United States, so he went to Europe. He was in Denmark for a long time. But his combination of the formal, the historical, this kind of deciding how he would paint, and then also, you know, painting these depictions of the Black community that was his community, is sort of a political act, right? A political act within the broader culture, a political act within painting, right? So I think as my sort of earliest, you know, I was like the first painter I like ever loved, huge influence in terms of the way I work, which is cultural, but also formal, like both of those elements. Also really love this Luis Jimenez sculpture that is on the front of the Museum of American Art. I love that museum because it has a lot of like outsider artists as well as American, like really important American artists that you don't hear about as much. Like to me, I always thought that Luis Jimenez and Jeff Koons had like the same career because I liked his fiberglass sculptures so much more. And I couldn't believe that he hasn't, you know, he didn't have the opportunities that Koons did. But he had worked with auto body in an auto body shop. So he chose to use fiberglass, which, I mean, when you think about it as an American, you know, material is like so profound and like important. This one, I think it's quite large, border crossing with these very high-toned fluorescents, really amazing. I was also super influenced by underground comics and like women's comics specifically. I had worked with this great political cartoonist at the sandwich shop in Charlottesville who was writing her dissertation on women's comics being like Carnival. The idea of, and this is from the 70s through the 90s, the idea of there being a space where nobody's paying attention to you, so you can just go as wild as you want, because you're not really you're at the center, right? So you don't have the people looking at you, so you can just do wild stuff. This is Aileen Kaminsky-Crum, R. Crum's wife, on the cover. And these are these anthologies, just really wild, interesting aesthetically, and also in terms of what they talk, you know, what the stories are about. This is one of my favorites, Julie Doucet, French-Canadian. Like every corner of her drawings are just covered with these like kind of teeming objects, just like completely filling. There's a great, My New York Diary, which I'm pretty sure is why I moved to Newark. reading that. It's a great one if you can find it at a comic book store. If I Was a Man. And there's really funny too, like a lot of humor. And just images that just, she's fully going for it and like amazing. Leon Golub, he almost stopped making art during the Vietnam War because he was like, what's the point? How can I make a difference as a painter? It's not a political enough act. So he started to tack up these huge pieces of like almost raw canvas and use a meat cleaver to create these incredible textures, like apply the paint and then scrape it in this really violent way. And he just started painting these kinds of mercenaries and these kind of big dumb guys, like violent guys. This one, try burning this one, asshole. It's like 1991, but it could be 2022, Yeah, just kind of the go ahead, I also loved Mike Kelly. When I saw this in grad school, I was just like, this kind of anti-cool or anti-heroic. He's like, you know what? I suck. An artwork that's like, hey, I'm a pants shitter, proud of it. I wear glasses. Like, I just thought that was really revolutionary. I mean, I think that way of being owning that you're a total loser is its own kind of like pose, which I see now. But at the time I was like, this is amazing. And he also did these pieces that played on minimalism or abstraction, but were also pulled from thrift stores and these kind of like very loved Afghans and objects. Very Americana to me. I love this piece, David Hammond's. This is actually the Cooper Union, the school in New York, and he set up selling snowballs at different sizes perfectly. I just love this performance. Commenting on capitalism and the economy, but also commenting on being an artist and making a product, right? It has all these layers. He's just really incredibly brilliant. This one, I'm putting this in here because these are my favorite Jeff Koons pieces. They look like they were bought at the dollar store, but they're actually, aluminum. And I loved specifically this installation in Versailles. It's like, okay, that's your culture. This is our culture, And there's something really freeing about that. I was an anthropology major. It's like all culture is good culture, and this is our contribution as Americans. And in fact, there was a huge, it was controversial at the time. There were protesters because they said, I didn't come here to see a Red Lobster that I can buy in a gas station. It's a true selling of the most sacred aspects of our heritage and identity. So it's kind of this great way of flipping. And I don't think people often think of Koons as like a controversial artist, but in this context, just putting like a pool toy in the middle of Versailles really got people upset. And I made this edition, a sculptural edition. There are these cubes. I decided to take one of my cubes and make it actually a sculpture. It's only like 18 inches, but it's painted aluminum, kind of like the lot, it's kind of like a little bit of an homage, but it looks like paint, like it looks really painterly. And it's based on this painting. I got really interested in sort of makeup tutorials, but then also there are all of these images online of women with paintbrushes near their mouths, like eating paintbrushes, and like stock photos of like the paintbrush all over a woman's face. So I got really into that. And this is, just this idea of representing like, women as a subject for painting historically as like an object of beauty or sexuality. And then how do we disrupt that a little bit by interjecting, kind of disrupting that gaze. This one, like nail art, but a little bit. When this was in my show at PS1, there was a class of like 12-year-old boys that all loved. They were like, what's your favorite painting? They're like, the one with the guns. So yeah. I guess I kind of thought of these as the most kind of overtly political of my works, maybe. Um, okay, social media. Let's see, sorry, let me go back here. 2011, I joined Instagram. So I was like kind of an early adopter compared to a lot of my friends. And I started to notice all these photos of food. I don't think it's as prevalent, although there's certainly a corner of social media where you can go and still find tons of them. But at the time, it really struck me. It was kind of an aspirational thing. It was a way that people were kind of showing off, like either I went to this really cool restaurant or I made this really cool thing. And then they were taking these amazing photos of their food. And I was like, where are they getting these ideas about composition? You know, it's based on food photography, maybe on some knowledge of still life. So I got really down this rabbit hole of making people's food photos. So there's sort of like still lifes. Then there are larger ones with multiple, you know, this person took like 3 views of their kimchi hot dog. Like, that's hysterical to me. You know, like there's some like humor in there as well. And at a certain point, I think there were, when I was making these, there were like 40 million photos on the food porn hashtag. Now I'm sure it's so much more. And very global. You know, you could see as Instagram kind of went global, there was food from all over the world and people posting. This was my friend who has a restaurant in Brooklyn. He would post photos of, you know, meat that he was fabricating himself as a way to say, hey, look, it's local. Hey, you know, sort of speaking to like this foodieism and this kind of local, eating local. Chicken and waffles, lots of food that went, that was everyday food, like became kind of elevated. Like, what is this, 10 years ago? Yeah, all the, you know, hummus, which is like, you know, street food for a lot of people became like, oh, hummus, you know, all these, so you see these trends kind of happening in the foodie space. And this was sent from one of my former students from Applebee's, which like so iconic, I think. My gallerist sent, oh, I'm having oysters. I wanted you to see this photo. So I would make people's photos. Yeah, there's just a ton. The Life I Deserve, which is the name of my show, I took from this. So a lot of times I would use people's text or titles of their photo as the title of the painting. And this was The Life I Deserve. Then I started to get really, I saw this image of the smoky eye tutorial, and I loved the idea that the painting was drawing and painting itself while you look at it, and it wants you to like it. Like, it's teaching you, but it also wants you to like it. So I was like, I love this agency that the painting is having. So I started to make a lot of makeup tutorials. This is like a grid of these, like they're roughly 3 feet each. And then there's all this makeup, more costume makeup tutorials at the time. Little Mermaid, this idea of, is the image actually, you know, what is the gender of the person taking the photo? You have no idea. And we were talking earlier at lunch about how makeup, in terms of the way that it's being embraced by our culture now, is very informed by drag and drag makeup. I mean, the Kardashians and the painting of contours and all of that is straight out of drag makeup. This was a very popular Tumblr photo at the time. Then I got really into lips. You know, the lips are so expressive of different moods. Again, it's kind of painting. I go into these forums where makeup artists are talking to each other, or on social media, talking about brushes, talking about pigment. And I'm like, what's the difference between a makeup artist and an artist or a painter? So kind of looking at these other subcultures of creatives. This is a large eye one, and just a lot of like emotion or pathos or something in that eye. This one, hilarious and sad. It's kind of like an internet word, hilarious sad. Oh my God, I'm feeling so hilarious sad. Yeah. Did I skip over a thing? I was pretty sure I had, memes. Oh, this is still internet. Okay, this is social media. So memes. When I first saw this image, like 2014, I was like moved by the fact that I didn't know what was real and what wasn't real. I mean, obviously, cake butt is not technically real, but it looks so real, it kind of confused me, which is a good space that a lot of us are in now. Like, what is real, what is not when we're online. And then I was interested in things that are real paired with things that are fake, but in the real space. You know, and memes, the idea that something could just communicate to you, a painting could just tell you a joke, which, you know, memes are like, I mean, you could write a dissertation on memes and their importance to like internet and social media. This was a search, like if you search equality, like you'll get a lot of images like this on Google. And then I also started to like make my own memes. You know, this is a lit piece, but I thought I would, you know, kind of put my own spin on it because, you know, somebody was like, you know, you can't take other people's memes. Like, okay, I can make a meme. You know, I think I think I can do that. So I've made some of my own kind of slightly influenced by meme paintings. The butt cake. This, I was watching a lot of like GBBO, Great British Bake Off, and sponge. They're always talking about the sponge. And I was like, American flag sponge. Nails on nails. Now I'm like doubling myself. I'm looking back at myself. This is a painting of my painting on my painting. Kind of this constantly looking back, looking at yourself. You spend half your time on social media looking at your own profile. The Jazzle. And this is an excerpt from Gia Tolentino. It's actually from Houston, I think. Yeah. She has that book is great. And this passage I thought was so interesting. She says, women who, as John Berger wrote, have always been required to maintain an external awareness of their own identity, often navigate online conditions profitably. It's the self-calibration I learned as a girl, as a woman, that's helped me capitalize from having to be online. My only experience of the world has been one in which personal appeal is paramount, self-exposure is encouraged. This legitimately unfortunate paradigm, inhabited first by women, now generalized to the entire internet. So I think like if you see like women artists doing, you know, so much better than we did a generation ago, a lot of that is linked to social media and women's ability to participate in that space because we've grown up with the self-consciousness. Like, oh, sure, I can put myself out there. I have to put myself out there all day long for my entire life because everybody's, you know, your existence is very mediated by like people looking at you, being aware of you. So I thought this is like a key point, really relevant to a lot of, especially women working today. I was really into body painting at a certain point, or finding images of body painting. So I would consider this like a subset of like memes, which is people who make art referencing famous artists in order to kind of draw a line between themselves and a famous artist, right? So this is kind of a meme, and also does that Van Gogh and Bacon, Starry Night and Bacon, sort of pop art, Liechtenstein. Then I started making my own, where I would paint my own lips. This is Pollock, Klein, Kelly, painting them on my own lips as a way to kind of homage and kind of a fan art thing, but also kind of like a, hey, let me bring you to my level kind of thing, and kind of a silly kind of, yeah, reimagining. Mondrian. This is like O'Keeffe and Ellsworth Kelly and like a pink Mondrian. Warhol. I was trying also to do kind of recognizable painters so that we could play more into that idea of fandom and like they would be accessible to anybody who saw them. This is like the de Koonings, Willem de Kooning and Elaine de Kooning, her painting of JFK and his painting of woman. And I kind of thought about it, their relationship was kind of volatile, so I have all these lips, kind of these angles, and the brushes look like swords. And then I also paint My personal fan art, which would be like Lee Bontecu, this is a piece in the MoMA collection. Like a lot of people won't know who she is, but I wanted to make my own kind of homage. This is Laura Owens, painting Laura Owens on my lips. There's also, I do a lot of nail art. I just was obsessed in the beginning with this idea of little paintings. You know, it's the body, it's the hand paired with paintings, or paired with artwork, these tiny little artworks. Sometimes, you know, they come across as much heavier, like dice, like chance, man, like what's gonna happen in my life, you know, but it's nail art. Sometimes they're just purely funny. This is kind of a crossover with food and nails. So a lot of my work starts to double back on itself. This one I did in my studio. Sometimes I'm making my own nail art. I'll go looking for hot dog nails. I can't find anything good. I make my own. This is like the famous, Catalan banana. Okay, on beauty. So people are like, your work is about beauty. Or they'll ask me about beauty. But the thing is, I don't know how to make a beautiful painting. I don't even know where to start. So I'm kind of more interested in the idea of trying to be beautiful, or the painting is trying to be beauty, you know, be an object of beauty and then failing, and maybe it's gross. That's more interesting to me. You know, beauty can be really searing and painful. You know, when I saw this image online, I was like, this looks like a religious painting. It has like the cross, it has stigmata, you know, like this person is suffering, you know. But it's also like, you never know what you'll find beautiful. Like, to me, this is kind of beautiful, this like dripping, disgusting, like sandwich, or burger, multi-burger. And I struggle with beauty, because it's like, sometimes I'll expect something to be beautiful, or I think, oh, I'm going to be moved by this. It's going to be incredibly, people will be like, you have to go see that show. It's like so beautiful. And whether it's because people have hyped it or whatever, I get there and I don't feel the same thing. And then other times I'm walking by some random graffiti on the street and I'm like, that's beautiful. You know, like, so beauty, you never know when it's going to strike you. I'm just adding that because that's my painting with Louise Nepelson. Like, that's a super beautiful, I think that's a beautiful piece of hers. So, so this is the Sistine Chapel. Does anybody know what that is on the right? Famous Americans apartment. Trump, that's Trump's, yeah. So some of my work when it comes to beauty, or the way I think about beauty, is like the European ideal, and then Americans trying and feeling, you know, this kind of kitsch that comes out of us trying to be sophisticated, and just that contradiction within our cultural tastes of things. This is a great book by Elaine Scarry. She says that beauty always wants to be replicated. So maybe for me, I guess for me, when I look at all these paintings that I made, I find those subjects beautiful, you know? So when you're thinking about like, what is my relationship to beauty? Well, what are the things you want to replicate? Like those are the things you find beautiful, you know, even if technically other people would find them, you know, terrible. On humor. So I don't know, I can't make really serious work any more than I can make beautiful work. Not that anybody necessarily sets out to make serious work, but I feel like there's enough serious work out there that I don't have to do that. So I feel like free, but some of the work I would say relates to this idea of shamelessness online. Like, there was Trump's apartment, you know, Trump is the king of kind of shamelessness, right? And there are these two things that exist, like specifically I would say like on Twitter, which is like, there's shamelessness and then there's shaming, right? You're either being shamed or you're being shamed. It's like these extremes of like, you're either being put in your place or you're just saying the most ridiculous, heinous stuff. So that shamelessness, I mean, I think too with celebrity culture and social media and reality TV, there's a real shamelessness. Like, there's nothing they won't show you, right? I mean, sex tapes, like, people get famous for that, you know? So shame is just kind of like, so yeah, I just made this painting is just kind of summing that up. This is, okay, so this piece was in London last year. Somebody was just like, I was just telling somebody, just like laughing in the space at the painting, which I was actually like, ooh, that makes me feel weird. Like, I don't want people to necessarily laugh at it, but there is humor there. I mean, I don't know. So I'm kind of conflicted about like, yeah. So humor is also obviously a way that we process like grief and heavy things, right? We can kind of laugh them off, but that could be kind of a cover for some like darker elements. Part of my work is just like testing, can this come off as, could this be a real artwork? Could this like ridiculous thing actually function as a painting? Like, would people take it seriously? Sometimes people will be like, I really don't understand where it comes from, and you know, where this kind of tendency and this like grossness and this ridiculousness comes from. And I'm just like, you know, I don't know, where does it come from? Where could it possibly be in our culture that we have ridiculousness, you know? Like, I really don't know. And so in the end, I'm trying to make paintings that embody the anxieties, the pieties, shamelessness, pompousness of our lives online. Can a painting of a body represent these interior states? So that's kind of like, that's where this work is coming from. Thank you guys. Are there any questions? Yes.
So you said you get a lot of your photo references like online from Instagram, Google, things like that. And a lot of photos today are copyrighted. How do you get past that?
Well, copyright's a really complicated thing. Like, technically, I mean, I could do a whole other hour on like fair use and what you can. Generally, I mean, if you're changing the purpose of an image, so somebody is posting, you know, their art as makeup art, the way that they, you know, gain their income is from doing makeup or selling makeup. So me making a painting of it, doesn't necessarily impinge on their ability to make a living. What's different is if somebody's a photographer, a fine art photographer, you take their fine art photo, you make an artwork with it, it infringes on their right to make a living on their work. Does that make sense? So, you know, the jury is still out on a lot of things like memes. Sometimes I've made a painting from a meme and I literally cannot find the author. I don't know. You know, sometimes they get modified 100 times, like who authored them, you know? So there's also like with the food photos, it was like, I made a painting of my friend's food photo and showed it to her. She had no idea it was her photo. So there's a weird way that the internet becomes your memory bank for your photos. So you put something on there and you completely forget about it. And you don't even remember, you know? So I'm like navigating a lot of that. But I think ultimately, as an artist, you just have to make what strikes you. Whether you want to put it out there, whether you want to make money on it, who knows? But you can't, you know, you have to be you have to be smart about it. And I've definitely learned some lessons along the way, but you're going to make what you're going to make without asking permission if you're an artist. And then kind of, yeah. So I started to make a lot more of my own images because, I don't know, I started to not find, I think one of the big changes was like the algorithm on Instagram. I used to get random stuff and now I just get all of the stuff, all art. Like I just get images of paintings. It's like I can't, so I started to make a lot more of my own stuff. I hope that answers. But a lot of the things with copyright, there's actually a big case going to the Supreme Court over Warhol's use of the prints, the photo of Prince as a screen print. So that'll be really interesting to watch because you're going to have this court deciding, like, and it's difficult to figure out whether conservative judges, which way they would go, like whether they would protect Warhol or whether they would protect the photographer. That also, how do you make screen prints without photographs? I don't know. It's like I said, I could go on and on, but it's complicated. Yes.
I'd just like to know, like, your relationship with language and kind of media language, like, even from, like, the early works, you're kind of pulling from, like, newspaper, which is, like, the most successful kind of, like, visual language, and kind of, as you're going to the internet age, you're making, or kind of relating to that. I just want to know, like, do you see these as kind of reactions to this language, cataloging of this language, or more like a anthropological praxis of these languages?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question, and that it's definitely more on the documentarian kind of side of it. Like, hey, this thing exists, more from anthropological, understanding, or like, let me record this bizarrely fleeting moment as this like really concrete thing. And the language, I used to make abstract work, and then I think like the internet kind of pushed me into more narrative work. So there's just so much conversation and so much verbiage, right? We're just like overflowing with opinions on everything. So I think that like that definitely shifted the work that I made. And I think that's partly why you're seeing a lot more narrative work, a lot more overtly, is we're just living in this world where we have opinions on everything, right? And we're just, so it's definitely influenced by that. And there are a lot of, captions that people will put on their photos with different words that are terms that are very buzzy or like internet-y. A lot of these kind of words that are multiple words in one, like hilarious and sad. I like to use the language of the internet to title pieces and to title my shows. I had a show called Saturday, which was kind of something I would say like a bunch of years ago. But yeah, so it's an important part of it. And I think it's shifting the way art is made too, for sure. Yeah, thank you. So, yes.
So, you're a professional artist, right?
Yeah.
So, what about the art world is hard for what is something you found that the art world is hard for you?
Yeah. Well, one of the really challenging things is that the art world is sort of set up in a very casual, friend-based, it's all about relationships. So it's complicated when it is then also a business if it's how you make your living. So it's like, oh, I'm working with this gallery. They're my really good friends. How am I going to, but like maybe they're not doing the best things for my career, or they made some bad decisions and I need to shift to this other gallery. Like, how am I gonna like leave my friends, like it's very hard. That's the complicated part of the art world. I think the hardest part is that I always want to be friends with everybody. I want to like have this huge group of, let's all do this. And then as soon as it becomes like a professional endeavor or there's money involved, then it's like, how do we make this all professional and our relationships professional? And so it's the best thing about the art world is that it's all based on relationships, and sort of the most complicated, thorny part is that it's all based on relationships, if that makes sense. But that's a great question. I mean, I'm sure there are other issues. I could talk about auctions and selling, the idea that you could sell a work to a collector who's not good for your career. What do you mean selling? Selling an artwork is always good, but like, oh, maybe it's not good in this case because this person is gonna, throw it up at auction. And, so there's definitely lots of parts that are tricky. But that's probably the most thorny, is friendship versus business kind of situation. Yeah.
I was curious about your shift to moving 3D forms. What made that shift?
Yes, that's a great question. I think I used to have it in my old talk and I kind of skipped over it because I'm so, it's invisible to me now. But yeah, I used to make like the flatter work. And then I was in a studio building with this guy, Art Guerra, who has a paint company in New York called Guerra Paints. And he brought me a bunch of this very heavy body acrylic. I was also like, I was making super flat abstract painting, and I went to a sample sale for Zoo York, which is like a streetwear company. I don't even know if they're still around. This is like 15 years ago. I went to a sample sale in a basement with literally like as far as the eye could see racks of t-shirts with these amazing graphic designs, like abstract designs on them, all screen printed, and they were all $5. And I was like, wait, somebody could just make screen prints of my, like basically the kinds of paintings I made could just be made on a screen and put on a t-shirt. And these are all way better than my paintings. Like, what am I doing? You know, like culturally, what, you know? So I started to like get really into this idea of handmade and things like not being able to look like they were made by a machine. I also really love like outsider art and Americana, this kind of idea of relief. Relief is historically to tell a story. You know, large sculpt, you know, if you wanted to tell like a biblical story or a complicated story, you wouldn't necessarily make it in sculpture in the round because it would be too expensive. So they would make like reliefs to kind of be more narrative. So there's like this teaching element to them. There's an Americana element. I love how when you photograph them, because they're going to end up back online, they kind of look animated, like they're made out of clay. They have their own shadow. They have this weird presence. So I really like that. Sometimes I think people don't know that the work is three-dimensional until they get into the space. But yeah, it's that's all part of it. Thank you. That's a great question. Yes. It depends. I'm working on a lot at the same time, but I would say probably like 40, depending on the size, like 40 hours per, like a week per, but it's like a week spread out in stages over a few months, something like that. Yeah. Yeah.
You just said that you kind of go from piece to piece, back and forth. So
yeah.
How is that when you know it's like, all right, I'm going to just break here and go on to this piece? Like,
yeah, for sure. Well, some of it is the process, like, oh, okay, I just added acrylic. It has to dry, so let me move on to something else. But it's a great question, too, because it's like when you have a deadline, like, oh, these 13 pieces have to be done by, then I will really try to start breaking it up to make sure that I give everything enough time. Because I could just spend 3 months on one painting, you know, but, you know, how finished does it need to be? How realistic, you know? So sometimes like a deadline will just force me to like, okay, I gotta like finish these sooner, which I know is not what you should be hearing in school because in school it's like work on it till it's done, but it's like, when is it done? You know, it's kind of complicated. It's a good question. Yes, thank you.
When you mentioned that you went from like one project to the other project to the other project, that it helped you out from like, I guess like picking back and forth. Like how do you go like from one project and then get inspiration from that one to like jumping to another one?
So it was interesting. I mean, some of it is like I have tons of photos on my phone of things I want to make, and then somebody will be like, "Hey, I'm doing a show, a group show with like." It's a figurative show. So then I'm like, oh, figure paint, you know, so then I'll jump in and I'll be making some of the figurative ones. Okay, cool. And then I have a solo show coming up. Like, how am I gonna, so jump back into my folder and be like, okay, which ones of these have a conversation? Which ones, because of the way I make my work, it all has to kind of be started at the same time so that it can dry. So I'll go in, like, figure out what the show will be and then make the work. So yeah, and I've always struggled, you know, I talked to a couple artists today about this, which is like being all over the place with my work and feeling like, oh, do these even look like they're made by the same person? You know, that kind of vibe, which I think, you know, is something that is placed on us by the galleries and the world, is like, have a brand and stick with it, you know? And I've always been really bad at figuring that out. So, and a part of it is the way that I'm open to ideas. Like, I want to make everything. I want to make lots of random stuff. And I'm so open with my ideas that it leads me down all these paths. Yeah. So I don't know if that's a good answer for your question, but sometimes it's an opportunity comes up, and sometimes, yeah, I get distracted from what I'm working on and work on something else. Thanks. Yes. Sorry, I didn't hear the last part. I mean, that's a great question. Part of it was just completely just being honest about what I was looking at. Like, I used to look at things in the world. Oh my God, I used to look at buildings and be like, look at this beautiful like stain on the side of a building. I'm gonna make a painting of that. And then 2010, I think, I got my first iPhone, and all of my looking went into the phone. You know, I stopped looking at the world around me, just started looking in here. And the idea was like, well, I'm a painter. If it was 200 years ago, I go sit in a field and paint a landscape. But it's, you know, 2010, I'm looking at my phone all day. I'm gonna paint what's in there. You know, so that's really the shift. I mean, that was really it. And I was just trying to be honest about what I'm looking at. You know, it's just, you got to be honest as an artist. Yes.
So I know because a lot of people struggle with screens and when to put it down.
Yeah.
So the fact that you're relying on it or using it as source material, can you talk about your relationship to screens and?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely battled it a lot. Like I've tried every kind of app to like limit. Used to have that one app that like shuts your phone down at a certain point. I think that as like, I'm not really on TikTok. I didn't really go in that direction. So as I've gotten a little bit older, and now my algorithm is all other artists. So it's like, do I want to go on Instagram and see all of these friends and other people? You know, it can make me feel kind of competitive and like bad about myself sometimes to go on, because it's just like, oh, here's your whole world, all the people that you love and are competing with. Look at them all day. You know, sometimes it's not awesome. So I think my relationship to it has changed. I'm much more on Twitter, which please don't bother following me because it's like, it's a junk account. I mean, I just say the dumbest. I made some comment about like the airplane, like roller bags on the airplane. Like that's how dumb it is. But I like Twitter because of all the like kind of dumb comments. There's a lot of politics on there and it's very off the cuff. So I think I'm more in that world. Probably Instagram has really just become like a professional space to like, but yeah, as far as limiting it, I don't know. I'm very bad at it. I'm very bad at prescriptions for that. I mean, yeah, I usually just have a deadline. I cannot go on there or I get sucked in or, you know. But I think if I was younger, I would find it, you know, I was a teacher in middle school for 12 years and I was constantly battling the phones, you know, like, hey, look at me, you know, trying to take phones, getting into fights over the phones. It's like, it's a huge shift, huge cultural shift. I'm not really sure how to disengage. Yeah, but it's a great question. We should probably have like a whole symposium on that. Like, how do we unplug? How do we find space? I was reading like, I forget the writer, but pretty well-renowned writer who went to this retreat, spent the whole time trying to get internet on his phone because he was so happy to be out in the middle of nowhere so he could just write, and got completely obsessed with the fact that he was not connected and kept going and like trying to find internet. It's like, you know, it's the world we live in now, you know, it's hard to escape. Yeah. Yes, oh my gosh. Oh, did you, oh yeah. I think,
Raised her hand several times. She can go.
but this is so great. Thank you for all the questions.
I was wondering, what is like the main themes you want to tackle with your works, and what have you ever faced any controversies in your works?
I mean, the main themes is like main theme is sort of trying to represent, you know, through the figure or through parts of the figure, these ways that we exist online, kind of like these new kind of anxieties and things that we have. I haven't really faced like any major controversy. Yeah, I haven't, I can't really, I don't think, there was a weird issue with like my vagina burger. Like, I thought at the time, like, surely we're like past this, it's like not gonna faze anybody. And it didn't, except that people were like, is that your own, you know, do you have the right to paint anyone else's vagina kind of thing? Because like if it's not your own, you don't have the right to paint it. And I was just like, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know about that. Stuff like that, which, yeah, nothing major though. Thanks. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
She said to go to like lots of events.
Mm-hmm.
Your advice.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I mean, I think it's like now, I think it's paired with like a pretty robust like online presence, whether it's Instagram or TikTok or something like that. I think that that's a way that you can kind of show people what you're working on outside of your area. But when I was starting out, I would go to art fairs and look at the art, or art fairs or galleries, find the art that I really liked, and then write down the name of the gallery. And then if they had openings, I would then go to their openings and try to like hang out and like meet people, you know, and then I ended up in a group show, which then led to a solo. But I would also say this is sort of New York advice, because in New York you could go to an opening every night, right? There's just so much. But I would also, as a woman, just go by myself. I have friends that like go like a few women together. I mean, it's the same thing, men or women, but I think specifically as a woman, this urge to like go to something and then talk to your friend, you can't do that. You have to like go and meet people and kind of expand your base. The other advice is like DIY. Like some of the best experiences I've had in the art world is when me and some friends decided to put on a show ourselves, found a space, put up our work, invited some other people. The most fun and like the most exciting kind of generative, like real, experiences too, are kind of the ones we did ourselves. Yeah, and I mean, I was really mercenary about it. At a certain point, I would go to openings and I'd be like, I'm not leaving until I meet one person, even if it's the guy that's only there to drink the beer. Like I'm gonna talk to one person. Like, so slowly start to get to know people. And then social media really helped, because then you're DMing people about their work and they're writing you, and creating a space online as well as in person. I think really important. Yeah, I mean, I've known artists who just skyrocketed in like a year because they got noticed on Instagram. I mean, it happens, like, for sure. So, yeah, it's not how, when I was first starting out, it's not how it was, but now I think it is like that. Well, thank you guys so much. Thank you. Thanks for all your questions.